Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Fellowship in Essential Oils. This week we're looking at a delicate flower and its amazing essential oil. We're looking at violet leaf. How are you, Liz?
I'm very well. I feel like I'm in a violet leaf kind of place today, very delicate and kind of light and airy.
Beautiful. And I must say, I know it's episode 56, but I hope people pay attention to what we wear each week because we often wear something fitting to the oil. And I got out my violet shirt for
Well, yeah,
violet
I
leaf.
need to do that because I epically failed. Because I went to my wardrobe and went, there is nothing purple in here, nothing violet. And my husband went, what about your pajamas? And I was like, I'm not pajamas. So I don't have anything. It clashes with my hair. So well done.
I'm holding it for both of us. And if you're listening to the podcast, just visualize us wearing purple.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Violet leaf is not in my collection. It's not one I've really worked with, but I did go down a rabbit hole over the last few days exploring it. So I'm really excited to share some of the things I've found out about it. But I'm going to quiz you a bit. When I was reading about it, I found it interesting. I found a violet leaf resinoid, a violet leaf absolute, and a violet flower absolute being listed and referred to in different references. What is
Yeah.
available from the violet plant?
Well, so I would say my feelings about it is violet resinoid is no longer available. Um, did you find that in Mum's book?
Yes, I did actually. Yes.
Yeah, so she used to really love it, and it was beautiful. It smelt like Parma violets, and it was quite cheap to buy, but I haven't seen it on sale for about 30 years, so that's disappeared completely. And violet flower oil, um, yes, is available, but rarely. The violet leaf absolute is the more popular one. The other thing that perhaps you haven't mentioned is oil. Violet oil is really easy to make. So, particularly in this country and in France, lots of people gather violets and just like make a maceration of it um,
Mm.
to use for things like sleep, but also for grief. But I would say you'll probably not have any problem finding violet leaf absolute. Violet flower you will find more difficult. And if you do find violet resinoid, please let me know because it really was one of my favorite oils, and I haven't seen it for years.
Oh, I wonder why it's gone out of production. Just no one's making
I
it.
don't think it was. I think it probably wasn't a very pure thing. I mean, if I remember, I mean, obviously we're going back 30 years, but I do think she only used to pay about £3.50, which would in today's money be about 15 quid, I suppose, for a big bottle, probably about 100 ml. So I think it probably was. You might find it like in India or something like that. I think it's probably like a perfumery oil. You can get obviously lots of violet fragrance in fragrance oils, but they're not essential oils.
Mm. So I'm guessing that violet leaf does have some physical benefits.
Oh yes. Without doubt, it is the gentlest of the oils. So actually, Mum made a rose and violet leaf moisturizer, which was by far the biggest seller of anything that she made because it was so good for people who had got really sensitive skin. Particularly like if you're prone to flare-ups from eczema or you have rosacea or you have that heat in the skin, then violet leaf is fantastic. And in actual fact, I've been using it in a cream I made for my husband for his radiation burns. And it really, I mean, there was lots of things in the cream to be fair, but I do think it was probably the violet leaf that brought down the sensitivity very quickly. It's profound. I should actually say, so it's quite an ugly oil when you look at it. It's not that dissimilar to spikenard in that it's got that like muddy green to it. So you might imagine that it would be because it's called violet, but it is the leaves that it's taken from. It does smell like violets, but it also smells like leaves as well. So as I say, that violet resinoid was just like Parma violet sweets. Do you have those? Do you know what those are?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Yes, that's like a 1980s dream. I might have to send you Parma violet sweets. They were tiny, tiny little sweets that were purple, and you used to get them for a penny when we were kids, like a tube of sweets. You can just like get them in retro, but they are really strongly taste of violets. And we have violet chocolates as well here. So eating violets is quite a tradition. And they are an edible flower, so you can pick them in the spring and put them on your cake. So it's quite, most people know the taste of violets, but it's a very pretty, rich. It smells purple. I know that sounds daft, but it does smell purple. Violet does, but violet leaf has more of a muddy kind of leafiness to that violet as well. And the other really good, so I would say anything that's kind of got an excess of pitta. So I often talk about excess of pitta, don't I? Where you have this inflamed nature, this hotness, this volatility to it. So skin, reactive skin, but also like hot diarrhea, burning cystitis, soreness on the skin, anything that's hot and sore, I would use violet leaf for. And the other thing is there's two other main areas which are insomnia. Very good for insomnia, especially if somebody has nightmares, and that they've got this like fearfulness that like monsters will come, or you know, flames in the dreams, what they call night terrors, you know, that explosiveness. Again, excellent violet leaf resinoid, and I've used it quite often for teenagers who kind of go from that I'm okay as a child, but then I go into angsty times as a teenager and won't sleep. But the other thing is grief. And if you've got Sacred Oils by Felicity Warner, she writes the most beautiful case histories about how she's used violet oil for grief. But I have to say, I'm pretty sure that she is probably talking about her maceration that she makes from the flowers, because she always posts every year, I'm going out to pick flowers to make my violet oil. But if you look in mythology, actually, it appears in lots of Melissa stories, but it's like a background player. But it appears when there's this awful tragedy, when something happens, the ground offers violet. So, for example, obviously the key Melissa story is the Demeter and Persephone story. And if you look in some myths, you'll see that she's out with several other friends, several other maidens and nymphs, including Artemis, and they are collecting wildflowers, including violet. But of course, it's the Narcissus that gets plucked and opens the ground. The other, and perhaps the older story, because the older bee goddess is Cybele or Cybele, however you choose to say it. And her consort was Attis. And that's the story of Attis's death. I would imagine probably inspired the story of Aphrodite and Adonis, because they're really similar. Attis gets gored by a boar, and where in the Aphrodite and Adonis story, when the blood hits the ground an anemone grows, or sometimes a rose grows. It's always the same in Cybele's story, that when the blood hits the ground, violets grow. So we have these ideas of this awful grief. So interestingly, for grief, I would use rose or I would use violet, and the myth is the same, but two different oils. So this idea that, oh, my absolute love, in the case of Demeter, the absolute love of her life, her daughter, but in the case of Cybele, Attis is just like not only her love, but she's almost created that love in myths gone by, that she's created this beautiful boy, this Attis. And what's interesting is that Dies Sanguinis, it was the Roman celebration of the death of Attis, And I write about it in Melissa book, and I should have got it out actually. It's in the Meeting the Melissa. I write a lot about the research into the priests, so not the Melissa priestesses, but the Gali priests. Loads written about them because they were so shocking. Not least because they would dress effeminately, they would dress as women, but they would also castrate themselves. And there's a picture in my book of actually the gadget that they used to actually castrate themselves, which was found, funnily enough, in the River Thames, not in Turkey or in Mesopotamia. It was found in London. But so on Dies Sanguinis, the new initiate would castrate himself, and the Dies Sanguinis means day of blood. So that was his initiation into the cult of the bee goddess. And that would happen on May 25th, which is around about when you start to see violets popping up around here. So very interesting to see how the symbolism is really layered. And once you start to look for it, you go, oh, that's what they were seeing. They were seeing that coming up. So he must have died at that time. The violets came up, so that's when we'll kill him. So interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about it being a grief essential oil. When we normally look at grief essential oils, you normally get these really quite heavy hitter kind of oils, you know, like Palo Santo, guaiac, myrrh, frankincense, cypress, all these types of ones. It's quite interesting that violet leaf does fit in there, but it has a totally different approach to dealing with that grief, doesn't it? In that kind of gentleness and soothing rather than the density that we get from these other big oils.
Yeah, and I mean, you said it earlier that you went down the rabbit hole. Violet leaf doesn't have rabbit holes. She just goes, shh. She's not expecting you to go on this deep journey, and sometimes with grief in particular, you can't engage with your emotions. So like as you say, Cyprus is very much about death and rebirth and thinking about death and thinking about, you know, that journey and what that means to us and mortality, but violet leaf just goes.
So obviously there's many stages through grief. When would you particularly maybe reach for violet leaf? Would it be like the funeral day when you just need to kind of hold it together and just find that calmness?
Well, forgive me, Dad, but me, my grief for my dad dying happened way before he died. Yep. He went from this person that was just so besotted by his children and only wanted to know what was going on in our lives and wanted to know what was going on with his grandchildren. But his cancer consumed him and his pain became the only thing he could think about. So to me, he was dead before his body died.
Yeah.
So my grief, when he finally did die, that was like, thank goodness it's over, because he was gone a long time before. Yeah. So, you know, grief doesn't actually necessarily happen with when somebody dies. It can happen for many different reasons. It can happen because somebody's relationship has died, somebody lost a job, somebody has gone bankrupt. You know, there's huge loss involved. So this idea of, you know, it's so sad. So it's sorrow rather than grief, perhaps. Not just melancholy. Melancholy is different, but deep sorrow of my heart just hurts and I don't know how I'm going to recover from this. You know, that's violet stuff.
Yeah, beautiful. I also wanted to point out, you mentioned that you've had great success with night terrors and violet leaf. How would you normally use it in that case?
Yeah, so it's an expensive oil, so you kind of don't want to be putting it in the bath, whereas bath would be my favorite thing for anything to do with bedtime, always bath, because I love baths, but it's way too expensive. So I just like to get people to put it onto the inside of their arms so that it goes into the bloodstream. There's lots of other oils that you can blend with it that are more calming to have in the bath. So actually, Melissa is a really good one for nightmares, but again, it's sharp, so I wouldn't want it in the bath. So that's good in with the violet. But things like just simple things like lavender, vetiver, patchouli in the bath, but then a blend of oils, including violet leaf, for them to just have on before they go to bed is really good.
Do you know what I've found almost fail-proof when it comes to night terrors is juniper berry on the soles of the feet.
Right?
Works really, really
Why do
well
you
for
think?
any. Sorry, go
Why do
on.
you think? Why do you think?
I have no physical kind of reason why, but considering that, in our episode on juniper berry, we talked about it being an oil of the darkness and having no fear and all that kind of thing, I think it just allows us to whatever's coming up to face it and to feel confident with it. Because the other thing is, if you have night terrors, it'll stop night terrors, but if you don't, it'll actually make you dream more. So I actually have a
Yeah.
practice every Saturday night. I put juniper berry on my feet because Sunday morning I can sleep in a little bit and dream a little bit more, and it always amplifies my dream. So I find it, an interesting oil. So it'd be interesting to combine it with violet leaf, see what happens.
Yeah, interesting. I would be careful of doing it when somebody had night terrors, though, because they're so different.
Yeah,
Do you
okay.
know what I mean? The energetics are so different; they might cancel each other out.
Yeah, probably more for dreaming, but but I find for night terrors, try violet leaf, but also maybe juniper berry on the feet has worked really, really well as well. Just as a
Yeah. I
suggestion.
think that sounds lovely. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, for such a delicate flower and oil, it does, it's not like chamomile and lavender that kind of are off with the joyous, happy parts of life. It does kind of sit around these dark stories like you've been sharing with us. Um, when it comes to association with deities, I found it's associated first of all with Dionysus or Bacchus, the god of wine, especially around that idea of I guess the aspect that really resonated with where I could see the tie-in between Bacchus and Violet Leaf. I don't know if there is a story that you have on him and Violet Leaf, but in that Violet Leaf seems to give you that confidence to be uninhibited. It's really good for quelling anger, but also really good for quelling when someone's feeling timid or fearful as well, to kind of step outside of your comfort zone, whether that be, to deal with those scary things around death, to bring up an issue that you've been avoiding and don't want to look at. But this Bacchus or Dionysus energy is very much like let what I love about them is as a satyr, they're seen as being these party animals. But by having no fear, they actually experience much more of life because they're in the nuts and bolts and the crux and the nothing's out of limits or off boundaries. And I think Violet Leaf can really help in that way to help us express things. And I think really with anger, anger often comes out. Yes, it can be when we're angry, but it's often a mask for some other frustration or fear or a bit of a cry for love. And I think Violet Leaf could be really helpful in those instances where anger is used as a shield for something else.
So there's two kind of threads on Dionysus. Who was Dionysus' mother? So he has two names. He has the name of Dionysus, but and Bacchus is his Latin, his Roman name, his Latin name, but Dionysus is his Greek name. But he also is called Iacchus sometimes, and he has another name that's gone right out of my head. But the other name, Persephone was his mother. So Dionysus, the myths that call him Dionysus, he was born from Semele, but the older myths, Persephone was his mother, and we've talked about, and by Hades, I think. And there are stories of them wearing violet wreaths made out of violets, but I can't remember what it was for. And I remember thinking they'd have had to need a lot of flowers to do that, because I don't suppose you've ever seen a violets growing, have you?
Not natively, no. So I am kind of scratching my head a little bit. I like you were talking before about everyone knows what violet tastes like, and I'm like, I don't. I have no idea.
You have to be really careful, don't you? So violets are so tiny. The plant's tiny, and they've got so the leaves you've got on that plant to the side of you, the big plant, much darker than that, and tiny, tiny leaves, and they grow in the grass. So they're almost like tiny, tiny in the grass. And the flowers are probably about as big as my thumbnail.
Wow.
But you'll only get one, like, so there's one flower per stalk, and it'll maybe have 2 or 3 stalks. So you can have a whole embankment where they'll be like really spread. They don't. They run by runners, but they don't grow close to each other. So somebody must have spent hours upon hours upon hours collecting violets, and I think the only reason they could do that would be for something sacred. That wouldn't be just like, I'm just going to like you can't do like a daisy chain, for example. But there is something to do with the Orphic mysteries where they were, but I can't remember what it was. But you are right, there is that association with Dionysus.
Yeah, so I think violet leaf could definitely be used for helping to give you the courage to face things that you don't want to face, and you know, whether it be dealing with death, accepting death, you know, working through grief and that type of thing. I think it'd be an awesome oil for that. The other connection, it does seem to have a connection to Jupiter as well. And it sometimes seems as being a bit of a lucky plant. And so it not only helps us deal with all the negative stuff, but can actually bring in some blessings and have that kind of delightful energy about it as well.
Well, the taste, eating them is delightful. It is. It's quite a fun taste. But going back to what you were saying about the Orphic mysteries first, the Orphic mysteries was about death and rebirth. They had this idea that they would when they went down to the underworld, the underworld, they would be reincarnated. So definitely in terms of past lives. And so from the Jupiter point of view, Jupiter is about 9th house stuff, spirituality, higher learning, the quest for something higher. Well, all of that would be Dionysian stuff as well. Dionysus is about irrationality, and he's about the moon, and he is about dreaming. He is what happens within the dream space, and usually I mean, his priestesses were the maenads, and they were terrifying. You know, they were melisai, but they were dark melisai. You know, the people saw them rip the heads off creatures, and you know they were the darkest of the shamans. So I would imagine whether you could find it written, but maybe if you looked long enough, you might find something to do with maenads and Dionysus and violets. I would have thought.
Yeah. Where do you find, you know, in if you were using it for like spiritual work or meditation, where would be your number one thing you'd use violet leaf for?
I have to say I wouldn't. I know exactly what Mum says in her book. She said she always used to say it was an oil for scrying. Now the thing is, I don't scry. I can't scry. So she has a crystal ball, and when she holds the crystal ball, it kind of just turns on and she can see worlds open up to her. And in the Melissa tradition, we have what's called the black mirror, and also I sometimes work with the rose mirror. So the black mirror is would originally have been obsidian and staring in a way at something that makes you know the visions come through, and the visions are sometimes about what will come to pass, or perhaps what is coming to pass behind the scenes. I cannot scry, so therefore everything for me I hear. I never see visual things at all. I'm not clairvoyant, I'm clairaudient. So but if somebody Mum always says that it's extraordinarily good for clairvoyance.
Okay, yeah, I'm clairaudience isn't my skill set either, so yeah, interesting in that way. Yeah. So do you think it's an oil that people need to have in their collection?
No. I think it's one that depends on what your skin's like. If you've got hyperreactive skin, then it would be one that I would go and get. If somebody was really struggling with grief, it would be one that I would get. If you really have tried everything else for insomnia and you're still not sleeping, yeah, I would go and get it. But it's really expensive. and it's one of those that most of the properties something else can do. I do really like violet leaf oil, and I do use it, but I use such a little amount. So rarely. I would say no, unless you can see an actual reason to buy it, don't buy it.
Yeah, yeah. And I was interested by a comment you made earlier on. You said it's the gentlest of all the oils. That's a big
It
call.
is. It's what?
That's a big call.
Yeah, it is. And actually, so these days, I always say do not use essential oils on babies because the oils are not formed on their skin, like their protective oils are not formed on their skin properly. But when my daughter was born, I actually created a baby range with talcs and like nappy creams and stuff, and I put violet leaf in every single thing.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so I've been persuaded by modern thinking that that would not be the right thing to do. But in terms of what I felt that I wanted to use on my children, violet leaf was my choice.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about some different mythology. Astrologically, where would you place violet leaf?
Well, all its associations are with Venus or with the moon. I think I don't think I would associate it with Jupiter myself. But also, yeah. So I think Venus and the moon.
Venus and the moon. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I'm as I said, I'm still kind of getting to know this oil, but yeah, that Jupiter. There did seem to be a few references about how it does bring good fortune and things like that. So I could see that expansive nature, but
It does, but the Jupiter. I'm going to argue now. So the Jupiter, well, the Jupiterian vision is huge. You know, if somebody with Jupiter catches a fish, it's that big. You know, it's exaggerated, it's massive, it's loud. That's not violet leaf. Violet leaf is whisper. It's a whisper in, you know, behind. No, but so I yes, good fortune, but actually, so Venus is about money coming in, you know. So there is a fortune comes in different ways, and Jupiter is too loud, too Zeus. It's not Zeus. It's really small, divine, feminine, quiet at the times when people need silence.
Yeah, it is interesting though that violet leaf, for its gentleness, the two references that kept coming up were Dionysus and Jupiter, which are two of the loudest figures in mythology, really, isn't it?
Yes, but Dionysus is different. Yes, he is the god of debauchery and wine, but also he's the dark spaces, you know, and he is born from the bowels of the afterlife, you know, and Apollo is the god of sunshine and light and order, whereas he's irrationality, he's dark spaces, he is nightmares. You know, he's related. I couldn't tell you exactly the family tree, but closely related to Melino, who is the goddess of nightmares. You know, that's that family there. Whereas Jupiter's up shouting the odds right up here, and violet leaf. And actually, so maybe you don't know this because it's not in your vernacular. But somebody who is shy, we call them a shrinking violet.
I have heard that term before. Yeah.
So again, if somebody's really shy or somebody who has been shouted at by Zeus, you know, you've got, in fact, I'm not going to say too much, but it's happening a great deal in my industry at the moment. Somebody's shouting very loudly about stuff, and everybody else is going, I'm quite frightened of this. That's a violet leaf application. So I think that Jupiter is the bully, really, rather than and shrinking violet is. I'm sorry, I don't know. I don't know how to answer. You know, blushing. You know, I said how everything is red. So yeah, all those I would say is Dionysus, but I would say Jupiter. No.
Fair enough. Chakras. Third eye. Yeah. For its ability to help with those clairs.
I think dreams.
Yeah.
I think the way that it modulates thought around things like shyness, you could really attack that from a Jupiterian construct and go for solar plexus. But I think that medicine is too strong for somebody who's battered down. So almost like CBT on the brain of like challenging thought processes, but also it's very close to the ascension of the crown chakra, and all of the things we're talking about are Dionysus, we're talking about Persephone, we're talking about Cybele. Those are the upper realms of consciousness. These are spiritually advanced capabilities when you're dealing with those kind of deities. So yeah, there and there, I would say.
Yeah, I would say the crown for me for that kind of that gentle expansiveness, I think. Yeah. Well, it's another oil that, yeah, I got to do some shopping again. You keep on tempting me with these different oils. So, but I think next week,
yeah, well, you'll need a mortgage.
Yeah. I might revenge you and see if I can dig up another Australian oil that we can dive into and see maybe we'll put one in your shopping list next week.
Yes, I'm excited to like for you to return the teaching favour, actually. So, so yes, I'm excited for that. Bring it on. Bring on the challenge.
Right. Well, make sure you tune in next week to find out what oil we're suggesting. It is one from Australia, but it's probably one you haven't worked with. But let's see if we can do a good job at telling you why you might need it. Anyway, thank you very much for joining us this week on Fellowship in Essential Oils. We'll see you again next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.